Portal Prelude is an impressive showcase of Nvidia's RTX Remix technology. The modders who made it utilized Omniverse-based modding tools to take what was once a source mod for Portal and give it visual features and technology that rival and surpass ultra-high-end AAA releases. It is spectacular, and hopefully it is one of many path-traced remasters to come out in the future as Nvidia releases the RTX modding tools in due time. But that's not the thing I'm going to talk about today. Portal Prelude RTX is also the first usage of RTX IO, a GPU-accelerated decompression scheme running under Vulcan from Nvidia. And since this is the first actual modern release of a game with GPU decompression on PC, it's the perfect opportunity for us at DF to explain and investigate. RTX IO is Nvidia's branded moniker for similar technologies and concepts that you may have seen in Direct Storage 1.2, which will see its first game debut with Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on PC. The purpose of RTX IO and Direct Storage 1.2 is to accelerate loading and streaming on the PC platform. For old games like those from more than a decade ago, and before RTX IO and Direct Storage came into existence, loading would look like this. You have game data on a disk, like textures or models. And I'm talking about a hard drive here, so those old rusty platter spinning drives. When the GPU needed data to render the scene, the data would go bit by bit from that hard drive into system memory, and from there it would be uploaded to the GPU, with the controlling party here deciding this all being the CPU. This worked in a latency heavy and serial manner. Latency heavy as it would take time for the disk to start spinning, and then the data had to be sought out and located. Serially, as the data would load block for block in a way to maximize data locality on the disk. Remember, the actual physical location of data on that spinning disk was key to how fast the data could be moved off of it. Disparately placed data could slow the entire system down, as data that was not local to the area already being read from would require the seeking step to occur once again, which would mean more latency. So data accessed on a platter drive of old was accessed in a sequential manner. That was the old system that was suited to spinning platter drives and smaller game content. In the last decade or more, game data has exploded in size, and games are now hundreds of gigabytes, and individual assets are often huge and detailed. Shipping such big assets in big games in an uncompressed format is not really reasonable anymore or even feasible. To reduce file size on disk and reduce download time and bandwidth used, developers now ship games often in a compressed format on disk. That is the situation on the game side of things. On the hardware side, spinning platter hard drives are no longer the storage medium of choice. We now have faster solid-state drives on PC with no moving components. SSDs do not have the latency-heavy seeking and spinning period that hard drives have. As a result, data has comparatively near immediate access, and its locality on the drive itself is not so important anymore. So the data doesn't need to be moved off in this old sequential manner to prevent seeking like it did with platter hard drives. Data can now be accessed in parallel without great compromises to speed like before. So this is the situation we have nowadays: SSDs and big games with compressed data. The old system that I described earlier for getting data onto the GPU is not the most efficient anymore as a result. Firstly, data on disk with the old system of Windows I/O would be reading the data sequentially from the disk, even though this is not necessary anymore with SSDs. And the nature of that data is different too. It is often compressed, and when it arrives in system memory and then goes out to video memory, it needs to be decompressed, and the party responsible in the old system would be the CPU. CPUs can decompress data just fine, but it can come at the cost of significant CPU resources and perhaps impact the frame rate of the game being played. Due to these issues, the industry is now moving to new systems such as RTX IO or Direct Storage 1.2. With RTX IO or Direct Storage 1.2, data is no longer being funneled and read sequentially as if it were residing on an old spinning platter hard drive. Data in the new system can be accessed in parallel, which is a speed up in its own right. Secondly, that compressed data, which is moved from the disk onto the system memory and then over to the GPU, is decompressed after it is already on the GPU, and the thing doing the decompression is the GPU. GPU has lots of cores and do massively parallel tasks like decompression often better than CPUs can. This is the new system envisioned for RTX IO and Direct Storage 1.2. The key benefits are faster loading times, and when used in gameplay for streaming purposes, it will mean a reduction in CPU load, which could potentially improve performance. And for RTX IO, as it is here in Portal Prelude RTX, the data on disk is compressed in the G-deflate format. The G-deflate format is an open GPU compression standard from Nvidia, which was given over to Microsoft into the Kronos group, and is the format, for example, that you will see most likely used in Direct Storage 1.2 games on PC, and it should work on Intel and AMD GPUs. That is for DirectX though. Portal Prelude RTX uses Vulcan. Currently for Vulcan, there is no agreed upon vendor agnostic standard calls for this GPU decompression. As far as I know, there's just the proposed extensions from Nvidia. These extensions from Nvidia for GPU decompression could potentially be the ones that are adapted wholesale by the Kronos group for Vulcan's direct storage equivalent. But until that happens, in the meantime, the fast GPU decompression in Portal Prelude RTX will only work on those drivers that support the specific extensions used. And at the moment, that means Nvidia RTX GPUs.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about the wall I moved in the test chamber. Moving it was totally useless. That's not funny, Eric. This whole thing's supposed to be serious.
As you can still see there, Portal Prelude RTX still has standard loading in it. RTX Remix is not replacing the game engine here, and how levels are split up is still the same as it was in the source engine. Rather, RTX Remix is changing the way how rendering is done and how assets for that rendering are loaded in. This is different than Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, for example, which should also be using GPU decompression on the fly in gameplay in an obvious manner where the gameplay performance could see some advantages. In Portal Prelude RTX, it's mainly just speeding up those dedicated loads and how quickly assets load in to be seen. So it will visibly reduce texture pop-in. But by how much? We'll check out this test here with RTX IO off in a special build of the game running off a SATA SSD capping at 500 megabytes per second. The game loads reasonably quickly, but the textures take some time to show their highest quality. It makes sense though, without RTX IO's G-deflate compression, the build of the game is using uncompressed textures instead and is multiple times larger. So bandwidth is going to be correspondingly taxed more to move textures into VRAM in their uncompressed state. So without RTX IO, it takes a little bit more than 1 second for the last texture to be loaded in-game. And you can see that here with the reflection on the glass. The emissive grate behind the camera, as reflected in the glass, loads in last. With RTX IO on, that same texture on the glass there on a SATA SSD loads in less than half the time. Not the largest real-world difference here, as it's a second more or less, but it's an impressive percentage difference here. And after having done a number of tests in different configurations, I have 2 key takeaway points. For one, a SATA drive with RTX IO beat a 3.5 gigabyte per second NVMe drive with RTX IO off. So GPU decompression levels up lower-end hardware. Secondly, I found out that the differences in CPU and GPU hardware did not dramatically impact loading speeds. The RTX 2060 Super with a 12900K performs much the same as a RTX 4090 with a 12900K. Same with an RTX 4070 combined with a Ryzen 5 3600. That performs more or less the same as the other configurations. So this is a promising first outing for this type of technology on PC, but at the same time it is pretty mundane as we're applying it to an older game here using still an older level loading paradigm. With other games that use active streaming with no loading screens of any sort, kind of like Ratchet & Clank promises to be, well, this is where that technology will show its mettle best. And you can definitely expect me to cover this technology again soon in depth, as that Ratchet & Clank release date is very close. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. If you did like this explainer of GPU decompression, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you are already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, support DF on Patreon to get years worth of our content in high quality for download. Other than that, comment below, follow on Twitter, and as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.